And 10, the mysterious car. I was messing around playing as Trevor, constantly dying as one does, but eventually I spawned at a hospital at night. I ran around, but I quickly noticed that there were no cars on the road, anywhere. After around 10 minutes, I saw one car when I looked down a road, but nobody was driving it. This sometimes happens in game, but this time I couldn't steal the car. It just stood there, like it was staring at me. I started to walk away, but after around 20 seconds, the car had vanished. There weren't any other cars on the road. At this point, I turned off my console and restarted the game. When I loaded back in, I was on the middle of the highway at night with no cars around. After a couple of seconds, that same car from earlier came flying in and killed me instantly. When I respawned, I was at the top of Mount Chiliad and the car was there again. It came at me, but I managed to dodge, as it flew past me and went off a cliff, but as I watched it fall, it disappeared. It came back at me from behind and killed me instantaneously this time. However, my game crashed. I deleted the game off my console and reinstalled it, and luckily this hasn't happened again, and hopefully it will stay like that. And at 9, I never finished GTA 5 Part 1. GTA 5 took my legs. I'm in a wheelchair for life now, but I wasn't before the events I'm about to tell you. I used to play GTA 5 uncontrollably. I wouldn't really play the story because I just enjoyed exploring the world and wreaking havoc. I was driving around the mountains of Tongva Hills when I spotted a woman. She was no typical woman of the game, and I am sure I have never seen her before. She was way more realistic than anything else in GTA 5. I mean, really realistic. Her face was so detailed it looked like photography. Her face was pale and her eyes were big and black. Her hair was long and it was pitch black. It looked as if she had never been washed. She was wearing a long red dress with marks of dirt on it. First, she triggered my curiosity, so I drove closer. I shouldn't have driven closer. I wasn't freaked out until she raised her hand and she said hello. Both her voice and her face were way too realistic for this game. I reacted to this by hitting her with my car, which knocked her over. I guess trying to kill it is a pretty common solution for everything in GTA. She had been knocked over by my car, so I drove over her legs so that she would stay on the ground. I shouldn't have done that. I really shouldn't have done that. It sounded nothing like any of the typical screams from GTA or any other game whatsoever. Her screams were so terrifying that I cringed my toes and my heart started beating way faster. And at 8, I never finished GTA 5 Part 2. She started crawling towards me, while staring right into my eyes with a horrific grin. Her grin was still wide, reaching from ear to ear. Her eyes were bigger and blacker than before. Her mouth had opened with blood coming out of it. "Alex," she said in a deep voice with the blood of her mouth making bubbles. She crawled faster, with determination. She was heading for me, not my GTA character. She was heading right towards the screen, and she knew my name. I noticed that I was sweating rapidly, and I shouldn't have driven over her legs. I almost jumped from shock when I heard my grandmother ringing her bell. Eased to get out of my room, I walked slowly towards the living room where my grandmother watched TV. For every step I took, I kept listening for any abnormal sounds. My grandmother then rang her bell again. When I reached the living room, I stopped in the doorway. My grandmother's wheelchair was standing in front of the TV with its back towards me. "Hey Grandma, did you call?" I said in a hoarse voice. The wheelchair started turning slowly towards me. Then I noticed my grandmother's gray hair was pitch black and looked unwashed. While the wheelchair was turning towards me, I could hear the haunting sounds of crushed legs being dragged over the floor from the wheelchair. The pale woman in the wheelchair looked at me with big black eyes and a grin full of blood and said, "Why did you do that, Alex?" I really shouldn't have driven over her legs. Number 7, that just happened. So I'm playing GTA just now and I decided to parachute off of a Learjet to the Grove Street garage. I go in, take a look at my JB700/DB5 and the Cheetah and decided to take my trans arm ruiner. I get in, Franklin turns on the car, and the game goes to the black loading screen. Suddenly, it shows Franklin with a few gunshot wounds in his chest, laying on the floor outside of a hospital, just randomly, like in a dream sequence. I let the game play out for a few moments, then it shows Franklin walking out of the hospital, and then the game takes $5 grand for medical bills. I know it's likely a one-off bug that I doubt anyone else has experienced, but it happened. Also, the game sorta seems dimmer, as if it has the wasted and blurring or shading effect. And because it's not a creepypasta story without the Lavender Town music, that just came over the radio just as this car turned on. Just got back to the garage and the private jet that I bailed out of is in the parking lot just outside of it. Blown up, of course, and the car had been taken from the garage. And at 6, Franklin the schizophrenic. Franklin lived drugged with pills in a psychiatric hospital, and in reality he was very troubled. He lived in his mind, surrounded by things that didn't really exist, like his friend Lamar. Lamar would show Franklin how to survive the hood. He worked with Franklin and showed him the ropes of repossessing cars. Things can get really out of hand for both Franklin and Lamar. The two get into trouble on a regular basis, but none of this is real. It's all in Franklin's head, but he doesn't know that. But I guess neither do we. We play in that world that Franklin lives in. Does that mean that we suffer from the same things? Are we Franklin, and is Franklin us? Oh, hold on, Lamar's calling me. This one was on Wattpad in Spanish, okay? The translation wasn't the best, so I worked with what I had, okay? Cut me some slack, damn it. Halfway through number 5, Gray Ice. While getting 100% completion in the game can get you access to some glorious UFOs, you can start getting a handle on the truth that's out there as early as a tutorial mission. If you go off course during the game's opening and drive out onto the frozen river of North Yankton, there is a particular spot where the player can spy one of the game's alien models trapped underneath the ice with his arms outstretched. There's no explanation for the body and no context. The origins of the alien remain completely unexplored. While it's relatively disturbing to start the game walking over the corpse of a dead alien, it's also an assumed statement of purpose from the game's designers. Sure, they're telling this grown-up story about criminal partnerships, betrayal, and redemption, but you don't have to take it all that seriously. Or do you? The human drama is just a small part of this weird world, and where is it going to go next? And at 4, the Banshee. I've been hearing screams. I walk around going about my day, and I get a sharp pain in my head, like the worst headache imaginable, and then they add screeching. It makes it impossible for me to move, it hurts so bad, like someone is screaming in my ear. Sometimes it gets a little quieter, but I don't know if that's just because I'm going deaf or if it's because of Mount Chiliad. One night I decided to investigate the mount. I know that there's a ghost on top of one of the mountains, but Mount Chiliad has always seemed off to me. I went to the top and the screaming stopped. I don't understand why, since it was day and there was nothing there. I started waiting. I waited until I saw something, anything, but nothing came, so I just assumed that it was my television. So I turned it off and I went to bed. I was woken up in the middle of the night with the same screaming I heard from the game. I sit up and look at my TV, but it was off. At least for a few seconds, before it turns back on and loads up GTA. As this happens, I see my character walking on top of Mount Chiliad, so I go to grab my controller, but he makes a beeline for the edge and jumps straight off. As he hits the ground, the TV turns off and the screaming stops again. When I wake up, my mom was shaking me. She was yelling at me and my alarm was going off, but I couldn't hear any of it. And at 3, the scariest Easter egg. For this Easter egg, you need an unupdated version of the PS3 Grand Theft Auto 5 with 100% completion. Trevor needs to be killed, and once you've done this, switch to Franklin and go to the top of Mount Chiliad at 3 AM on a stormy night. Usually this will make a normal UFO appear, however, if you teleport inside of it using a mod or glitch of some sort, the UFO won't disappear if you get too close. Inside the UFO will just be the UFO's textures reversed. When inside, make sure you spawn a Sanchez using the in-game cheat codes. Once it spawns, get on it and drive around the ship until you find a white dot. Once you find it, drive towards it. If you do this at the right angle, you'll end up driving onto an invisible platform over the world where you can drive around. After a few seconds of driving around, you'll hear a loud scream, as if someone was sitting right next to your ear. It doesn't even stop there, because if you get off your bike, you'll start falling through the platform and you won't equip a parachute. And when you eventually hit the ground, the screen will go black. No wasted screen, no loading screen, it will just stay black as the screaming plays until you unplug your TV. And to the truth about Fort Zancudo, Part 1. I was having an ordinary GTA 5 online session with my friend. The typical stuff, you know? Killing cops, getting 5 stars, strip club, VIP work, invading the military base. But it's that last one where it got weird. My friend and I were in Fort Zancudo, in the tower you can get in from the ground next to the airstrip, and we were role-playing that we were gathering intel and getting rid of the evidence. We were shooting out monitors when all of a sudden, from the tower, we see a door open, but it was hidden in the airstrip. Us shooting out the monitor opened a secret area in the military base. Us, freaking out, obviously charged down to the tower to get to this door, thinking that it was an Easter egg left by Rockstar. As we get out, my friend gets killed by a tank, but I manage with great effort to evade it and make it to the door. When I walk through another door, my game freezes, and when it fixed itself, I found myself in a lab with empty stasis tubes and surgical desks everywhere. At this point, my phone dies and I lose contact with my friend. I go to plug it in, and as I do, the lights in game go red, and that's when the empty stasis tubes open and the fog inside them disperses. Creatures start to fall out of these tubes. They're oddly shaped, like nothing I've seen in game, and they're gray. Aliens. When I say aliens, I don't mean like the alien costumes you can buy or use in director mode. These things don't even have models in the in-game files. I checked. Finally, in at number 1, the truth about Fort Zancudo, Part 2. As I gather my thoughts on what I'm seeing, they start to get up. Oh great, they start approaching me. I go to equip my MG Mark II and it's not allowing me to equip items. I try to run but my character is frozen. As I lose all hope and accept my fate, my character pulls out his heavy pistol Mark II and aims it at his head. He shoots. As I respawn, my phone comes back to life and I get a call from my friend. He asked what happened and if I found the glitch spot because as soon as that door closed it had said I chose the easy way out. I tried to explain but he didn't believe me. To him, no time had passed. We continue on with our session avoiding the fort and instead we hop on a public session and mess with some fools and do some of the VIP work you can only do in public sessions. We get in his buzzard and my character climbs in the back. He doesn't get in though. He instead climbs higher into the blades of the buzzard and dies. My friend and I are laughing hard because we found it hilarious, and we count it as a glitch and move on. It wasn't.
And at number 10, the mysterious car. Let's begin our list with this creepypasta from Reddit user CF Future. The author tells of how they were fooling around with Trevor in GTA 5. After dying a handful of times, they noticed how after they respawned at the hospital, there were no cars on the road. 10 minutes later, after running around searching for a vehicle to steal, finally one drove by, an old rusty beaten up car. It stopped in front of them so the player moved Trevor down the center of the road to try to get it. That's when they noticed something odd. There was no one inside the car. So they walked over and tried to enter it, but nothing happened. They couldn't steal it. They turned around to see if there were any other NPCs or glitches happening in the game, and then they turned back at the car, but it had disappeared. Frustrated, the author restarted their PlayStation. They booted up the game again, only to spawn right back where they left off. The car appeared once more, driving towards them and stopping in front of them yet again. When the author went to the vehicle and tried to enter it, they immediately died. When they respawned, something very unlikely occurred. They found themselves atop Mount Chiliad. And what was with them? The same car. That's when the game crashed. Restarting it, they spawned in front of Trevor's house this time, and with no surprise, the car was there. Except this time, in the driver and passenger seats, Franklin and Michael were there, seemingly dead. So the player got in, and the car drove itself to the top of Mount Chiliad. And then, the game took over. Trevor walked outside of the car, shot himself in the head, and dropped all the way to the ground. But there was no death scene. No wasted. He just laid there. Eventually the car fell on top of him and exploded. The player then turned off the game, deleted it, and reinstalled it. The glitch never happened again. And at number 9, I never finished GTA 5. This creepypasta tells the story of a kid named Alex who lost his legs thanks to GTA 5, although by the end of the story, there's nothing that actually explains that. It's just what they began the creepypasta with. So what goes down? Well, when the game first came out, Alex played it non-stop. Before the accident, he lived with his parents and his grandmother who was confined to a wheelchair and couldn't walk. She had a bell that she rang whenever she needed help with something. So on an ordinary day, Alex was playing GTA 5 around 8 PM. He was driving around the mountains of Tongva Hills when he spotted a strange looking NPC. A woman, who didn't look like any of the other NPCs he had seen in the game before. Her face was really realistic, and she was wearing a long dress covered in dirt that looked like it was from another era. As he drove close to her, she looked at him and said hello. This startled Alex, not expecting it at all, and he hit her with his car. Thinking that he wasn't doing anything out of the norm, he just backed up his car, which then rolled over the NPC's legs. But then that caused the NPC to start screaming. It was a horrific and realistic noise and made Alex panic. The screaming continued for a few more seconds, freezing Alex in fear, but it eventually stopped and all went quiet. That's when the woman looked up at him from the ground and said, "Now why did you do that, Alex?" She started crawling towards him. It looked as if she was trying to crawl through his TV. So Alex unplugged his console. His television screen turned black. He tried to calm himself down, but that's when he heard his grandmother ringing her bell. He went downstairs asking her if she rang. His grandmother turned around in her chair to reveal a long red dress and dark hair, which was not how grandma normally looked. It was the woman that he saw in the game. Her legs were covered in blood. That's when his grandmother asked, "Why did you do that, Alex?" Moving on to number 8, Ring Ring. This one tells the story of a gamer who first picked up a GTA title when GTA 4 came out. He had gotten himself a free copy of the game from a dude whose name tag read James Poulton at his local game shop after buying a brand new PS3. That was the console at the time. At first he adored GTA 4. The online feature of the game was really intriguing to him too. Normally he would play with his friends from school, but one day he got a random message from someone called Vanessa. At first he thought it was a prank since this Vanessa person was speaking in a croaky voice. The gamer didn't reply back, but then Vanessa screamed into her mic, "I know you're there, I can see you." After shutting off the game and turning it back on to avoid her, she managed to find him again and kept saying the words "ring ring." Annoyed, the gamer went to bed. A few days later, another message from Vanessa popped up saying "ring ring" yet again. Having blocked her from before, he grew frustrated at how he was receiving these messages. Another one came through. It said, "I can see you." After not responding, he got a message on his phone from an unknown number. It was a photo of a girl with scars on her face, a bleeding neck, and a grin with bloody teeth. The caption read, "I can see you." The gamer looked back up to the game and discovered that his character had died. After that, he just decided to return the game to his local shop. Now when he went in, he was happy to see the manager of the store, a familiar face. When the manager asked him why he was returning the game since it was so popular, the gamer started to describe the events of what he had experienced with Vanessa. That's when the manager's face turned white. He asked the gamer who sold him this copy of GTA. The gamer said it was given to him for free, and it came from someone named James Poulton. That's when the manager told him that James had died 3 years ago, and had been murdered. So the gamer went home and googled James's name to discover in horror that the killer had been identified as a woman named Vanessa, and was the same woman in the photo that he had received on his phone. That's when he got another text from an unknown number, and it read, "Ring ring." Moving on to number 7, GTA Tempest. Tempest concerns itself with one of the myths from San Andreas, the man with an umbrella, who is sometimes called the rainmaker. Our author Matthew tells of how he was going through some of his old things and found an old pirated version of the game. The town he was from had a collection of game shops that sold pirated games on discs, and since he was often broke, that's how he played most of the new games that came out. Along with his 2 friends Kyle and Paul, they had pooled their money together to get the game. Matthew tells of how Paul was quite aggressive and Kyle was the opposite. He was frail and sick, and often avoided getting worked up because it could be troublesome with his health. Anywho, the 3 of them got San Andreas, but when they tried to run the game on Matthew's computer, it didn't work. It constantly crashed. Worked on both of theirs though. So they went home and installed it, and Matthew decided to go back to the store and get a different disc. Now returning home, he popped this new disc into his PC and it worked. Kyle and Paul, who had used the original disc, had no problems with their installation, so Matthew was happy that he could enjoy the game with them. After they all completed the game, his friends would play on, to look out for some of these rumored myths in GTA. That's when Kyle invited Paul, Matthew, and their other friends to his house after school one day, to show them something he had discovered. But when he turned on the game, he could no longer find it. Kyle told them that he had seen a man at the San Ferrero docks holding an umbrella while standing in the rain. When he spotted him, all the other NPCs seemingly disappeared, and a red marker appeared above the umbrella man. Kyle had said that he had saved the game and wanted to wait to show them before checking it out further, but no one believed Kyle and thought he was making it up. Later that night, Kyle called Matthew telling him he had found the umbrella man. He was in a feverish excitement, but then the phone cut out. The next day, Kyle was absent from school. Later, Matthew would find out that he had gotten really sick and passed away in the hospital. Of course, kids being kids, rumors started circulating that the mysterious umbrella man was the one who had killed Kyle. Paul and Matthew were really pissed off about that. A year later, Paul's family moved away. Out of the blue, one day, Matthew got a call from Paul, who told him that he had found the umbrella man in the game. At first, confused, Matthew asked what on earth he was talking about. Paul clarified, saying that it was the umbrella man that Kyle had found before he died. Matthew never heard from Paul again. So when Matthew found this disc, going through all of his things, a lot of cruel feelings boiled up inside of him. Then he remembered something. This was the original disc, the one that Paul and Kyle had installed on their computers, not the one that Matthew had repurchased. This is why they both had seen the umbrella man. So he decided to face his frustration and popped the game in. He went to the San Ferrero docks. Nothing happened. So instead, Matthew decided to go into the game's folder on his computer and see if it had some sort of mod in it. He came across something called Rainmaker Beta 0.5, a text document. On it, the creator of the mod, named Tempest, noted that they had added an extra mission, a mission that would change your life, and that they wanted feedback for anything that happened out of place. The creepypasta goes on to get more intense. It's a very long one, guys, so definitely give it a Google to check out its ending. One of the better written ones out there, especially pertaining to GTA. Moving on to number 6, GTA Hell. Our next creepypasta follows the story of a gamer who absolutely adored GTA when it came out, playing through the whole franchise religiously. One day he had found himself at a yard sale. The house behind the kid who was selling a bunch of random items had burned down to the ground, which he thought was kind of interesting. The kid, who was around 17 or 18, told him that he was selling all the things that he had salvaged from the wreckage. That included a box of video games, which just so happened to contain a copy of GTA San Andreas for the PC. So the gamer bought it, went home, and popped it into his computer. He immediately realized that something was off though. There was no install screen, or software license, or anything. The game just started. The sound was different than he had recalled the game having too. There was rapping, but in a language that he didn't recognize. Thinking it may have been a foreign copy of the game, he skipped the intro and went to the main menu. That's when he was greeted with 3 choices, all in the language that he didn't recognize, and Google couldn't pick up on what the words meant either when he searched it on his phone. But there was one option that said the word English, so the gamer clicked on that, but nothing happened. The language didn't change. So he started a game only to see CJ putting his bag on a baggage carousel. The cinematic then cut to something more jarring. A shot of CJ on his knees in front of a burning house. It took the gamer a second to realize that it was the same house that had the yard sale that he had bought the game from. Moving on to 5, Ratman. Published on YouTube by channel Creepreads, this creepypasta tells the story of a figure called Ratman that exists under Liberty City, in the subway tunnels and underground networks. The narrator lives within Liberty City, working in one of the skyscrapers in the heart of its downtown core. before. Hundreds of homeless people live under there too, hiding from the police, calling it Hoboland. And according to their stories, there's a man who scurries around the tunnels at night, who has the face and fur of a rat. The narrator tells of how his friend Jordy had once been on a subway late at night. It was delayed on the tracks, a short distance from the actual station. In a rush, Jordy convinced the operator of the train to let him hop out and walk down the track to the station's entrance so he could get a cab. But after he hopped out, he went missing and never returned home. At 4 a.m. the next day, police found him walking the streets in a daze, covered in orange goo and feces. He had no recollection of what had happened from 10 p.m. the previous night to when he was found. Now, months later, after returning to work, the narrator and Jordy were sitting alone together on lunch. That's when Jordy, in a barely audible whisper, said, "I saw the Ratman." Jordy told the narrator that he was attacked by the Ratman, who scratched him up. In retaliation, Jordy had dug his fingers into the Ratman's eyes, which emitted that gross orange goo. Jordy became obsessed with hunting down the Ratman and tried to search for him, sneaking down onto the subway tracks with a camera and a knife. Several weeks later, Jordy completely disappeared. So the narrator and his co-workers decided to visit him at home and see what was wrong. That's when they discovered police at Jordy's apartment. A search team ventured down into the tunnels of the subway, where they questioned several of the homeless people down there. Some recognized Jordy, informing the police that they had seen him distraught, running through the tunnels with a flashlight, screaming. After 3 weeks, the search ended, never recovering Jordy or his body. Tales from the homeless would eventually get back to the surface ground of sightings of a man with a flashlight running throughout the tunnels. Moving on to number 4, CJ.exe. This one tells of a gamer who had just hit 100% completion in San Andreas when something odd happened. Using the all cars fly cheat, they flew over their safe house in Prickle Pine, venturing around Las Venturas after saving the game. But that's when things got strange. They noticed that there were no NPCs around and no cars anywhere to be seen. Confused, they made their way back to the safe house. Upon entering, they saw something on the floor. Pools of red that looked a whole lot like blood. That's when they noticed that the reflection in the mirror wasn't CJ. Instead, the mirror was entirely black. Every other safe house they went to had the exact same thing. Now, upon leaving and exploring around, they heard the sound of an AK-47 being fired. Confused to where it was coming from since no NPCs were left in the game, they turned around, only to be hit out of nowhere with the words "wasted" on their screen. When they respawned, they were in the El Castillo del Diablo graveyard, and CJ was naked. Standing in front of them was another CJ, wearing bloody clothes and a hockey mask. The player decided to kill this CJ, spawning weapons with cheats, but that's when the blue screen of death appeared. So they rebooted their computer. Once back on, they looked for the San Andreas file, but it disappeared. Instead, in its place was a strange file called CJ.exe, and when they tried to click it, every time they tried to open it, it would shut off their computer instantly. Talk about eerie. Moving on to number 3, the monster of Mount Chiliad. This creepypasta is based off of a myth from GTA San Andreas that there is a monster that players can find around Mount Chiliad. There is said to be a giant lingering in the forest area nearby, a hostile giant made out of stone that will appear out of nowhere and gruesomely devour the player character. There's several variations on this creepypasta, but the most common tells of how players enter the area when on their first mission in Whetstone. They always hear the sound of foliage crunching, but turn around and never spot anything nearby. That's when the giant attacks you though. It just appears, and there's nothing you can fire at it or throw its way to bring it down. It's invincible. It's said that once it attacks and kills you, your game glitches and becomes entirely unplayable. Other versions of the creepypasta tell rather than a giant, the monster of Mount Chiliad is a lurking creature, not dissimilar to a vampire, that stalks the player character and sucks the life out of them, with the player feeling the pain as a side effect in real life. Up next at 2, the negative reinforcement experiment. This creepypasta is another one that has a few variations. Sometimes it's GTA 5 as the central subject of the tale. Other times, it's Red Dead Redemption. But regardless, it's still pretty eerie. The story goes as this. A gamer gets their hands on a copy of GTA 5 and is really excited to give it a go. They're immediately addicted to it, and find themselves taking great joy going out on killing sprees. After a while of senseless killing, the player starts to notice that the NPCs say final words to them. But afterwards, when they're dead, their character, whoever it is they're playing, starts talking to themselves about killing that NPC. It gets weirder. Their character starts talking about turning themselves in. Player always ignores it and continues with their killing spree. Eventually, they end up dying from a police shootout, but instead of the words "wasted" coming up on their screen, they just lie there. Eventually, these words show up on their screen instead. Try again? With a yes or no option. If they select yes, another phrase pops up that reads, "In life, you don't get to try again," and then nothing happens. So the player turns off the game and tries to reset it, but that's when they notice the file on their PlayStation has been renamed. Instead of GTA 5, it says Rockstar Games Negative Reinforcement Experiment, along with a number that identifies their console, and the words "result fail." Moving on to number 1, The Stalker. This one was published by Creepypasta and tells of a serial killer myth in San Andreas. Now, buying the PC version of the game while anticipating the release of GTA 5, the narrator tells of how the CD he bought off of Amazon was a dud. When the seller on Amazon never got back to him about it, frustrated and not wanting to buy the game twice, he downloaded a version of it off of Pirate Bay. And that one worked. Overjoyed, the narrator started to clock hours of the game, elated by the nostalgia of playing it once again. After a while, he noticed something intriguing though. There was a pedestrian who kept lingering around certain intersections, which he knew was not the correct spawning place of this particular NPC. So, for shits and giggles, he beat the NPC to death and went on his way. But he noticed that the NPC dropped something, a camera, which the player thought was odd. He picked it up to discover that he could actually snap photos with it. Thinking it was a mod, the player decided to hunt down another San Andreas myth, Bigfoot. So he went into the woods with the camera to snap some photos. That's when something strange happened. The NPC he beat up appeared there in the woods, almost out of nowhere. The narrator thought it was a glitch and went the other way. Now, taking a break from the game, he looked through all the photos that he had taken. That's when another odd thing happened. He noticed that there were a lot of photos on the camera that were taken before he had gotten it, and that they were of his player character from the earlier stages of the game. Seeing it as a challenge that perhaps someone had put into the game, the narrator searched the game for this NPC. Eventually he found them and went after them with a chainsaw. After decapitating him, something surprising happened. The NPC didn't die. Instead, the NPC walked towards him. The next thing he knew, the narrator's character was dead, respawning outside of the closest hospital. After he respawned, he noticed something eerie. There were no other NPCs in the game. It was like San Andreas was a ghost town. That's when his player character began to scream and burst into flames. The game then took a life of its own, with the narrator's camera switching to a distance away from him, looking at himself with a sniper scope, targeting him screaming. Then he was sniped and dropped dead. That's when on the screen the words appeared, "You were not alone." After deleting the game, he ran an antivirus check on his computer, which picked up on a strange virus that he had never heard of before. Looking deeper into it, he saw a bunch of photos of himself taken from his webcam while he had been playing the game, and another set of creepy photos taken from outside of his house windows. They all had the same caption too: "See you soon."